as a reporter, I wrote a lot of stories over the years, and certainly as an editor, I've read so many stories. But the ones that I think are the most important are the ones that help shape people's lives or help make people's lives better. But then you also have kind of I guess, the more flashy kinds of stories that happen, and they're the stories that people remember and people talk about. And so when you live in a state like Colorado, we tend to have some higher profile, certainly shooting type cases. We had the Columbine shooting, of course, back in '99, and then the Aurora Theater shooting case in 2012. And so one of the bigger stories I worked on last year was when the Planned Parenthood shooting happened in Colorado Springs, and it started off, it was Friday after Thanksgiving, and it seemed like it was going to be a fairly quiet day. And then all of a sudden we started getting word that there was some sort of possible shooter, possible hostage situation going on in Colorado Springs. And as we figured out what was happening, we scrambled to get, some reporters and photographers headed down that way, because it's about an hour from us here in Denver. And then that story just kept growing and changing as the day went on, and ultimately it turned out, that unfortunately 3 people were killed, and the shooter was finally, after quite the long standoff, was arrested. And so, I'd like to say that the big stories are the happy stories, but sadly, the bigger stories tend to be the more tragic stories. There are a lot of people here who still have kind of that. It's part of the West. It's part of our culture. It's part of our heritage. So when you're driving down the street, you see certainly fish pickup trucks with gun racks in the back, and most cities in Colorado allow open carry. Not all. Denver, for one, does not. But so you do see that, and there is always a fair amount of push-pull on that issue. After the Aurora Theater shooting, for example, Colorado's legislature passed some pretty strict gun regulations in terms of magazines, how many bullets you could have for a gun, and some other things like that. And then that led to some pretty contentious recalls for some of those legislators. And so it definitely is an issue that people are very passionate about. And one of the questions with the Aurora Theater shooting was the gunman in question was able to purchase, a lot of weapons, a lot of ammunition, and he did it mostly through mail order. And there were no questions raised about why would someone buy those kinds of things. And so that's something that Colorado has definitely kind of been on the forefront of looking at. How can we better regulate these things and keep track of them? And then the shooter, because of his mental capacity and his mental issues, that also raised some other questions. Should there be some more focus on mental health, and should there be any, the shooter, prior to going in and killing 12 people, he didn't have a criminal record. There were no reasons why he shouldn't have been able to buy those guns, but do we need to look at different things, and how can we both let people have their right to bear arms, but yet also try to keep the public safe? And there are no easy answers to that question.
What makes a big story? Well, one would hope that it is when humanity helps itself, when good triumphs over evil. But more often than not, as optimistic of a viewpoint as that is, and we wish it was, that's not the case. What makes a big story nowadays? Controversy. What makes a big story? Conflict. And how sad it is that those two things are representative of a society bleeding. And so that brings me to my final point. The old adage in journalism still applies today, as true as it was for many, many years. And I wish this was not the case, but it is. If it bleeds, it leads. We need to be better. We need to do better. To stand for truth and to teach it. We don't anymore.
Hi, sir. My name is Maxwell Ivy. I'm from Houston, Texas, and sadly, you're correct. The stories that get the most attention are the most negative, saddest, horrific, contentious, controversial. It seems like the more negative emotion there is involved in a story, the bigger it will be. At least that's the way it is with major news, papers, magazines, TV, etc. It seems like that with the online media, such as YouTube and Facebook videos and things like that, it's the more positive stuff that tends to go viral. I mean, it's the cat videos, it's the young boy saving his younger sister from falling off a changing table, it's the Chewbacca mom. So maybe it's not media, maybe it's the people running media that are is why the bad stories seem to get most of the press. I've found it interesting that I'm a self-published author. I'm one of this year's Amtrak writers in residency. I'm fixing to take a solo trip to New York City during the holidays by myself as a totally blind man from Houston, Texas, who's never gone more than 100 miles by himself. So it's a big trip. It's scary to me. A lot of people are tell me I'm either crazy or brave. I'm just doing it because I wanted to, and it's the next step in my personal journey as an author. But I've found it interesting that even my local papers don't seem to be showing as much interest as I had hoped. I really thought that when I won this thing and when I figured out where I wanted to go with it, that I would get a lot of opportunities for exposure and publicity, and that hopefully I would be able to work it into getting an agent and a publisher, and that my next book would be a bestseller. That was what I was envisioning when I found out I won. But I tell you, it's hard getting people to return my emails or phone calls concerning doing a story about me or having me on a show. Uh, so I hopefully things will get better. But if we go by recent coverage in my area of what makes the first 5 minutes of my local news, I think you're right. Sadly, it's the school shootings, it's the Columbines, it's the theater massacre, it's the nightclub massacre, it's terrorism, it's all those things that seem to monopolize the headlines and the time on the front page, the front cover, and the breaking news segments. But at least you're asking the question, Sarah. Thank you so much for that.